riding 300 miles on a trainer. That's what I want to talk about in this episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to No Drop. I have a bit of a reputation for doing long rides, and about 6 weeks ago, I got to accomplish what's been a goal of mine for a number of years, and that was to ride for 24 hours on a trainer. On this episode, I want to talk about the purpose of this ride, some things that surprised me, and also some tips for anyone interested in doing something similar. But first, I want to go over some of the stats from this ride. So, I was able to ride 300.77 miles. And I did this on Zwift. So I had a smart trainer connected to Zwift. Zwift was, controlling the resistance on my trainer, giving me all my data feedback. So I did just over 300 miles, climbed 7,591 feet. My average speed was 15.9 miles per hour. My total time, 24 hours. And that was the goal. The goal was not to ride 300 miles necessarily. That just ended up happening. The goal was to just devote 24 hours to riding the trainer as much as I could. So within those 24 hours, my moving time was 18 hours, 58 minutes, and 3 seconds. I consumed a lot of food in that time. Unfortunately, I didn't. One of the things I would have changed in hindsight, I would have kept a food journal and a hydration journal just to see how those things worked out. I'm just a curious person about those sorts of things, so it would have been good data to have, but maybe next time. I wore 3 pairs of bibs and 2 pairs of shoes. In the 6 weeks since I've done this ride, I've had some opportunities to talk with friends about it, talk with people on group rides about it, and the number one question that I get is, why? What is the purpose of doing a ride like this? And the purpose of doing a ride like this is simplicity. If you do big rides outside, those rides are incredibly, incredibly complicated and time consuming. You're prepping routes, you're prepping food, you need to take special food because it needs to be shelf stable. You actually have to do the ride outside. That introduces things like weather. You might need different clothing to accommodate that weather. You might need to think of safety in a very unique way. You're probably going to be riding through the night. What is that going to look like? So all those things really add up and add all these other dimensions of complexity to big rides. And I love that. Obviously, the number one place I want to be is outside, but to strip all that other stuff away from the ride and really just be able to focus on spinning pedals for 24 hours was very appealing to me. Very, very attractive. So that for me was the main purpose of this ride. The other purpose, the second thing, just in general with training, I think you should get weird with your training. Get out of your comfort zone, build some sort of toughness that requires you to just sort of go with the flow. That is so beneficial for big rides. I want to be outside. I want to be in nature. I love connecting with an area's geography and topography through the bike. I think that's the thing that draws me to cycling, maybe more than anything else. But again, to get weird with it, to take those parts away and make yourself train in this way that is not in any way your preference, I see value in that. And I think it builds toughness and it builds a very unique type of strength. So I was definitely looking to explore that world within this ride. There were some things that happened in these 24 hours that were very, very surprising to me. The first thing that surprised me was palate fatigue. This idea of palate fatigue is essentially when your body just doesn't want to eat solid food anymore. And probably 19 or 20 hours into my ride, my body, my mouth, I guess, just made the decision that, hey, we don't do solid food anymore. Didn't matter if it was salty or sweet. It didn't want any part of it. So from that point forward, I had to go with liquid only calories. And this was very surprising because I've never experienced palate fatigue before. It's not something typically associated with a 24-hour bike ride. So fortunately, I had some different types of calorie powders and electrolyte powders that allowed me to continue fueling for the last 4 to 5 hours. Very, very strange experience. Another type of fatigue that was really surprising was the fatigue I experienced at night. One of the challenging things about riding through the night is that once the sun disappears, your body just really wants to shut down. And how you fight that, how you deal with that, how you handle that is a very, very important part of, riding for 24 hours plus. At some point, you have to face the night. Typically, I do really well in the night. My riding stays really, really strong. I thought that being indoors with lights turned on in my living room with a TV screen that's also kicking out light, especially blue light, which is something that they tell you to avoid at night because it can disrupt your sleep. I thought I was going to get off scot-free regarding how my circadian rhythm was going to kick in once the sun set. However, on this ride, I experienced maybe the most intense nighttime fatigue I've ever experienced on the bike. So that was shocking. When the sun went away within a couple hours, I couldn't push watts. I had my wattage dropped, 40%, 50%, and I just couldn't do any more than that. It was a battle to get through the night. And really surprising considering I thought I had the easiest scenario in front of me for dealing with the night. The nighttime not only brought on these feelings of intense fatigue and kind of like wanting to go to bed, wanting to rest, but it also brought on incredibly intense aches and pains throughout my body. So, the sun goes down a couple hours later, pains are starting to pop up in, my back and my knee and my shoulders, up in my neck, and they're kind of rotating around. Sometimes it would be kind of all at once. The most soreness I've ever had on a bike was during this trainer ride. And that was surprising. I knew that this would beat up my body, but I underestimated how badly it would beat up my body. And then it seemed like the nighttime was really what triggered it. So whatever these feelings of fatigue and wanting to rest were, they were kind of accompanied with discomfort, extreme physical discomfort. When the sun came up, not only did I wake back up, my wattage jumped back up, all the soreness in my body disappeared. So, this relationship with riding and the sun is something that I'm even seeing as more important to understand. And I'm going to try to dive into that world a bit more so I can understand the physical and mental mechanisms of what's happening. I was fascinated by it. Not pleasant to go through, but what I might be able to learn from that is going to be really, really valuable. And the last thing that surprised me about this ride was the amount of time that I spent off the bike. I really figured that, having food around me, having a bathroom I could go to really quickly, having unlimited water within walking distance, I really thought that all of those things were going to make it so I could ride, maybe 21, 22 hours out of 24. But as I was getting into it, and especially after the first, kind of 120, 130 miles, just the amount of time you spend doing simple things, going into the kitchen, getting some food, or going and filling up your water jug that you're keeping next, all those things just add up so quickly. And then it didn't help with how fatigued I got in the night. I did spend a lot of time off the bike, laying on the floor, legs up on the couch. Um, there was no sleep allowed on this ride, but I was allowed to spend as much time as I needed off the bike. So I didn't even hit 19 hours on the bike. So the amount of time I had to spend off the bike just to prepare things and to rest was really, really surprising. The ride was really interesting to go through. That 24 hours really showed me a lot and taught me a lot about myself. And the following weeks were even more interesting as far as how did my body handle the recovery. And so I'm about 6 weeks out now from the ride. And I can say at this point, a month and a half, I'm feeling pretty good again. My fitness feels responsive. I feel like I'm increasing in fitness. I feel like I have energy and I have motivation. But it was not like that for many weeks after. So, this is how I can kind of briefly sum up the recovery experience from doing a ride this big. So, week one was just intense body fatigue, muscle fatigue, just really low energy. Didn't want to work out. I was really trying to keep my physical output at an absolute minimum during this time because I just felt so worn out. After a week, though, I started to feel pretty good. I was going to intentionally continue to keep my training efforts easy, low miles, low amount of volume in week two. However, week two, I had intense neurological fatigue. So my nervous system just felt fried. I was clumsy. I was not as good of a communicator as normal. I was worse at video games. Really, just kind of simple, basic things that you just kind of notice, just kind of more frustration throughout a day, just like you really can't put anything together. Um, that's my neurological system just continuing to be absolutely fried. Week three, my body's really starting to reset, and I'm really starting to notice that I'm going back to what I would say is just kind of a normal fitness experience. I'm introducing a little bit more volume, but I'm still being intentional to, not go too hard, not go too long, not go too often. So I'm really trying to continue keeping my training low. And then in week 4, I started to feel much, much better and kind of just let myself go back to an almost normal training schedule. So still trying to keep the volume low, but allowing myself to sprint, allowing myself to, go on a run or do some cross fitness things that might be extra challenging to my body. Now that I'm in week 6, I feel pretty normal. Long recovery. I mean, think about that. One effort putting you in almost a month long of recovery before you kind of dig yourself out of it. And now I can continue to take my fitness on an upward trajectory. So that's kind of what recovery has been like. I think to anybody looking to do a ride like this on the trainer, tips that I would have would be put some thought into your setup. One thing that I experimented with on this trainer ride that I'd never done before was I not only put a fan in front of me, but I also put a fan behind me. And those two fans, like I definitely would sweat during this ride, but I never had a drop of sweat fall off me. There were no pools of sweat or anything like that. The dual fan setup did an awesome job keeping me cool and keeping me dry. So that is definitely something I would recommend doing. Make sure you have like a table close to you. You can keep some food. You don't want to have to get off your bike every time you need to get food. So kind of have like a station near your bike, and then have like a main station. It could be in your dining room, it could be in your kitchen, but have another station where you can sort of replenish all of your supplies to have back on the bike. And the last thing that I would give as a tip would be give yourself some opportunities to not have entertainment happening. So, one thing people have said to me is like, oh, I bet you watched so many movies and, listened to so many podcasts. And I did. There was one show I watched an entire season of a show at one point. But there were lots of times on this ride where I just turned everything off and just had silence. And maybe like the food thing, that's another like stimulation thing where I don't believe you can just entertain yourself through this ride. I think at a certain point, anytime you're riding far or riding for a long time, you just have to create the space to really let the ride be what it's going to be. Just enjoy nothing for a bit. I tried to create some of those times because I was noticing that entertainment wasn't doing its thing anymore. It wasn't working its magic. So I would just be in silence. And that was a great palate cleanser. And some of the most memorable parts of the ride were just sitting quietly in my living room, spinning pedals on my trainer. Would I do it again? Yes, I will absolutely do this ride or a bigger trainer ride, knowing what this experience is like. And I can't wait to share that with you on a future episode of No Drop.